Greetings and salutations, loyal viewers of this channel. My name is Sean, and today I want to talk about housing prices in the United States of America, because unsurprisingly, the cost of housing has risen nationwide, but one of the things that people don't seem to realize is that in certain pockets of this nation, and certain pockets of this nation where people are moving into, including the fastest growing metropolitan area in the entire country, housing prices are remaining stable, or they're dropping, while at the same time they're experiencing a population boom. And the reason for this is because everything you're told about the left-wing media, about Wall Street investors, and oh my god, the builders, and all these different various corporations that are just jacking up the price of housing is completely untrue. And everything I've told you for a very long time on this channel about how you just have to let people build, let supply meet demand, is 100% dead on accurate. I also want to go over, by the way, two different segments from the Young Turks that were published a week apart that just go to show you that even though there's a lot of progress being made, and specifically progress on this issue from people like Anna Kasparian, there's just a level of disconnect, a level of not getting it, of not being able to put two and two together, which I think is a holdover from left-wing economic beliefs that are much more harmful on the issue specifically of housing than they are helpful. So we're going to get into all of this. I'm going to explain this, but before I do, I want to thank everybody who supports this channel via actualjusticewarrior.com/join.
Give me the money. Give me the money. Okay?
Richard Bellote loves the view from his backyard.
Every morning I get up and I go outside with the dogs and I have a cup of coffee.
But he doesn't own this brand new house. In fact, it's not for sale. His Montgomery, Texas community is part of a rapidly growing trend in the U.S. housing market. Blocks of single-family homes built specifically to rent.
It's a good stepping stone.
Despite saving diligently to buy a home,
the interest rates are just too high to manage.
He and his fiancée feel priced out of their house hunt.
And just really kind of crossing our fingers that those rates go down.
Stepping stone in what is likely to be an overpriced rental unit that was specifically built not for working class Americans to be able to afford and buy in order to build wealth, but specifically for lease. Now, look, typically, I don't have a problem with that, right? I think when you increase housing stock, that is a good thing. But we need to increase housing stock for both rentals and houses for families to be able to purchase so they can, build wealth, have stability, not worry about their landlord increasing their monthly rent. So Wall Street firms are now getting rich off of the housing crisis by essentially investing in build-to-rent homes, which Americans can never actually purchase.
So the first segment from the Young Turks that I'm showing you a clip of is about the major build-to-rent boom that is occurring across the country that long-term viewers of this channel will remember. I actually argued with Tim Pool about on my first ever appearance on Timcast IRL and made a lengthy response video over when Crystal and Sagar and Jetty over at Breaking Points were trying to argue that this was somehow depriving people of the ability to own homes. And specifically, this segment talks about one of these communities in Montgomery, Texas, which is pretty outside of Houston. I don't know if it counts as within the metro area of Houston, and how this is just something that we're all going to have to deal with. And Anna actually references the Klaus Schwab, "You will own nothing and like it" during the course of this segment.
We're now approaching this system where everyone is not going to own anything, right? You're going to rent and you're going to like it. Okay, the argument that was made at the World Trade, what was it called? I'm forgetting the name of the yearly or annual conference where they just basically said, we're going to pursue this system where people don't own things. They just rent things. I don't think that's the kind of system most people want.
Which, don't get me wrong, I'm not against highlighting, but in this specific context, Anna could not be more wrong. In fact, the takes that she has about how all of a sudden all the different regulations that are restricting the building of housing don't apply when these major corporations build these planned communities is one of the most absurd statements I've ever heard related to the housing market, and let me explain to you why.
But when you couple that with the fact that construction for homes to buy has dipped even further, this is a huge problem. I do find it to be a huge problem. And it's also interesting that these firms are able to easily construct homes. All of a sudden, there's no problem with over-regulation in these parts of the country. They're not running into red tape. It's just so easy for them to build the single family homes. No problem, right? No fuss, no muss. But when it comes to construction of homes for Americans to buy, we get all of the arguments about overregulation, which, by the way, in some cases is definitely true. In places like California, definitely overregulated, definitely makes it difficult to construct new homes. So I'm not saying that argument has no credibility.
So first of all, the number one reason for a high cost of housing is due to the fact that we have zoning restrictions and other building restrictions that are often voted on and supported by homeowners because it increases the prices of homes that are already owned by individuals at the expense of newcomers into the market. They know and understand that supply and demand is what dictates prices. It is undefeated in that regard. However, what we're seeing when it comes to these build to rent communities is that they're not popping up in major metropolitan areas that are experiencing the high price of housing or housing surging. They're actually being built in places like Texas that don't see anywhere near that increase. In fact, when we go to the chart on housing prices, which was covered, by the way, by the Young Turks just a week later, what we discover is that these very same communities that have been highlighted for the build to rent property boom are the places where housing remains stable or are the places where housing prices have dropped from their 2022 peak. And by the way, this is a pattern that you see not just in the state of Texas, not just in the Houston area, but in the DFW area and in the Austin area. And the reason why this is absolutely crucial is because Austin, up until very recently, was the fastest growing metropolitan area in the country, and that has since been overtaken by the Dallas-Fort Worth area. And despite the fact that these places are growing in population faster than anywhere else in the nation, it turns out that the rents and the housing prices are actually falling from the 2022 peak, and this is due in large part to the regulatory system that Texas has versus where Anna Kasparian lives in Los Angeles. Because guess what? They actually allow building in these areas. And a lot of people want to give credit to the Democrats in Austin for voting to loosen zoning regulations even more than they were before. But in reality, this is down to largely red state governance, because the state of Texas actually has a law that prohibits local governments from increasing zoning restrictions beyond the minimums or the maximums actually that are set by the states. By contrast, this is not true in New York. This is not true in Chicago. This is not true in Los Angeles and throughout California. So you see that those areas, despite the fact that they have declining populations, are actually seeing home prices go up. And intuitively, Anna Kasparian knows this. She mentions supply and demand throughout the course of this video as the primary factor. So I want to give her credit for that. But this segment is just peppered with a bunch of different other statements from her that are absurd.
If the traditional view of the American dream is you buy a home and that becomes your biggest asset, what does this do to that concept?
I don't think it takes it away. It solves some issues that are out there in terms of affordability, availability.
It takes it away. Okay, you're not building wealth when you're renting. Let's keep it real. And look, that's a huge problem for sure.
So look, I understand a lot of people are uncomfortable with the idea of Wall Street firms building these build to rent communities, but the fact of the matter is they are building, thus adding to the housing supply, and not everyone is in a position where it is intelligent for them to purchase a home. In addition to that, since you're increasing the overall supply of rentals, which are also desperately needed, especially with increasing interest rates.
But then there's the other problem. When you're a renter, you can't rely on the stability in housing costs that people who own can enjoy, right? So, there are parts of the country right now where people are seeing their rent go up, especially if they're living in a part of the country where rent control isn't a thing, right? So they'll see their rent increase by $500, $1,000. I mean, that crushes American families.
And Anna's statements about how, oh, especially in places without rent control, this is going to lead to higher rents is absurd in every possible way. Because again, just look at the places with the most amount of rent control. There are two cities that come to mind that quite literally have the harshest rent control restrictions. And you tell me if you hear stories about rent going up or rent going down in those locations. And it turns out those cities, by the way, are New York City and the city of San Francisco. In fact, it has been proven time and time again for decades in this country that rent control leads to increased rents, because what actually happens is that people who are in rent control units never leave those units, so the market ends up having less supply. Builders who are afraid of their apartments being seized by a rent control regime don't actually build units, and a lot of times rent control schemes only involve buildings over a certain amount of units, so again, you're disincentivized from building those higher amount of units, and all the people that are moving in never get access to those lower apartments, to those subsidized apartments, and by contrast, the remaining apartments, because of supply and demand, end up going up in value. In fact, there are so many different various absurd consequences of rent control cases that I want you guys to take some time out of your day and look up rent control related landlord versus tenant disputes in the city of New York, because there are instances where landlords will remove entire staircases in order to prevent people from getting to their apartment just so they could vacate that apartment in order for them to be able to rent it at a market rate, among many other absurd schemes due to the fact that rent control creates so many corrupt incentives. By contrast, in the places where these rent-to-own home communities are being built, you see lower costs, and costs, by the way, of housing that actually rise slower than the rate of inflation. This has been true, by the way, in the city of Houston for decades, which is one of the fastest growing cities individually in this country. It is now the fourth largest city, but soon to be the third largest city in the United States of America. But consistently over time, due to the fact that they have quite literally zero zoning restrictions, Houston homes have actually gone up in value at a slower rate than Houston incomes. Hey guys, Editing Sean here, and I'm fact checking what regular ordinary Sean said, because it turns out the cost increase of housing in the city of Houston is in fact outpacing incomes in that city from 2015 to 2021. However, there's some important notes that I'd like to add. First and foremost, the median price for a home in the city of Houston is still lower than the state average, and as a response to increases in costs, one of the very few land use restrictions that they had in Houston was actually removed. The minimum lot size was reduced significantly so that they could build more townhomes, and guess what ultimately ended up happening? They started building townhomes. Again, reducing restrictions, land use and zoning restrictions lead to construction boom, and this is why we are seeing a dip in the overall cost of housing if we go back to our previous chart from the 2022 peak, which again also was related to the fact that building supplies were in short supply, so you couldn't build to have supply meet demand.
Yeah, sure. You can make the argument that it's better that they're specifically building new houses for their little, financial schemes. But when you couple that with the fact that construction for homes to buy has dipped even further, this is a huge problem.
And again, right here, we have another fallacy where Anna is talking about how, there's an increase in the build to rent communities at the same time that there's a slowdown in housing construction for homes meant to be sold, and therefore these are somehow related, when the fact of the matter is there are increases and decreases in these types of building depending on where you are in the country. Again, in the very same areas where housing prices are dropping, that is due to the fact that they had a construction boom to coincide with the increased prices. But guess what? The rental units are being built there. In California, where you have prices going up dramatically, you're not seeing an increase in building in those states. One of my favorite charts compares Nashville to Los Angeles. Nashville, of course, saw a big spike in housing when people were moving there during the pandemic and building materials were restricted, but that housing spike was contrasted with an increase in building permits, and that increase in building permits, guess what? Offset the increase in prices. You can actually see the market, the supply, being increased in order to match the demand. And again, this is due to good conservative governance that limits zoning regulations, that doesn't allow current homeowners to attack future homeowners. But by contrast, in Los Angeles, when you're seeing the price of housing surge in that particular city, guess what? You actually see building permits reduce at the same time. So again, the issue is not build to rent properties or Wall Street investing in these particular areas, or a scheme by Klaus Schwab to say you will own nothing and like it. And just like in the same way that if you were to say that cars were unaffordable, banning leases wouldn't help you in that regard. The issue is overregulation, overzoning, issues like rent control in other parts of the country that are just not present in the Sun Belt. Again, Orlando in Florida, one of the fastest growing cities in that particular state. Guess what? Their housing prices are stable. Again, the same thing is true in Arizona. Housing prices are down. Phoenix is one of the fastest growing cities, but because they allow people to build, prices are falling, not rising. Now, to be 100% clear, it's not all sunshine and rainbows in the Sun Belt. The 5-year trend in all of these places, housing prices are definitely up, not down, but the same is true in these left-wing areas that are experiencing decreases in population, and the reason for that is because supply is never allowed to reach demand. And even though you're seeing high percentage increases in the value of the homes over 5-year periods, the fact of the matter is the homes already started off at lower prices, so even these increases are not as devastating and not as bad in terms of real dollar amounts as similar percentage increases are in Los Angeles and New York. And again, even with population notably declining from New York, from New York City, and from California, from Los Angeles, from other major cities there, they're not in the negative yet. It is not reversing, and it's not dropping, and it's not going to drop because restrictions keep getting piled on. New building keeps getting made more difficult. I'm going to link this map in the description of this video. It is an interactive map, so you can go over different metro areas, different geographic areas in the country, and see which places in which states happen to have lowering or falling housing, and then you can compare and contrast that to the fastest growing metro areas in the country. And what you realize is that when you allow supply to meet demand, guess what? Prices are going to fall. And in places where you don't allow supply to meet demand, where you have an overregulated housing market like New York, like Los Angeles, like San Francisco, like the DC area, it turns out that prices skyrocket. Again, it is really that simple. You need to increase the developing in these particular areas. If you don't have more units being built, then guess what? You're not going to see the drop in housing that you want. It's never going to become more affordable in these particular areas. And by the way, I would just recommend, because I get to travel the country from time to time to do different various events, that if you find yourself vacationing in any of these parts of the country where there are booming real estate markets, where people are moving into, you actually drive around those areas. Drive around the areas with the high prices and tell me where you're more likely to see construction. Every time I'm in the Orlando area, because I have family over there and we're driving around, I see development after development after development. When I'm in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, guess what? I see development. I see them building up apartments. I see them building up homes. I see them building up new communities. The same is true when I'm in and around Austin, Texas. You can actually see this. By the way, in Nashville very recently, this past year, saw the same exact thing. But I live in a hotbed of price increases. I'm one of those people who has a wonderful income. My wife just graduated law school. She's quite literally studying for the bar right now, and we are hopeful that we will be able to own a home in the future, but I never see more than one home being built, and whenever I see an apartment building being built, I end up looking into it, and they're doing all these different various schemes where they're holding some units below market value, they're raising the cost of other units so that they're unaffordable for the average person, so essentially you're dependent on a lottery on whether or not you're going to get one of those more affordable units, and the fact of the matter is, this is not a sensible reproducible system. Just allow people to have supply, meet demand, and guess what? You will see prices fall. Every single one of these places with one of these schemes ends up backfiring. And by the way, Cenk in this particular video where they talk about Florida's housing costs falling and they talk about Texas housing costs falling, and by the way, by extension, there's references to Nashville, not in their video, but they're using the same article. There's references to Phoenix and all these other Sunbelt areas. Cenk snickers and laughs and he says, ha, I guess people aren't moving there at all. And what he's citing, stupidly, is a slight decrease in the population influx that these people are facing, not accounting for the fact that they have better rules over there for building, and that's why you have housing prices fall.
This is obvious. Supply and demand are not negotiable. It's just a fact of life. And so when you have more supply, the prices come down. That's just easy to understand, and that's definitely what's happening here. I'm going to do a little needless ha-ha. So all the folks who are like, everybody's moving to Florida, California sucks.
Don't be salty because
Okay, no, it's not you.
He's salty because I thought about it.
No. You didn't go. Okay. No, it was a lot of folks, including right-wingers, who were like, California's dead, man. Everybody's going to Florida. Okay, well, what happened now? A lot of people went to Florida and Texas and realized, weather. Okay, that's kind of a factor.
Florida's weather, with the exception of hurricanes, obviously, right, is totally delightful.
Now look, to be 100% fair to Anna, she seems to fundamentally understand that the main primary issue driving the increase in costs of housing in places like California, in blue areas that are blue state governed and blue city governed, are zoning regulations and whatnot. But the fact of the matter is, she's still hanging on to some of her other previous beliefs that somehow it has to be the government partnering with these organizations, or you have to have a rent control scheme, or you have to incentivize affordable units, when in reality, that's not the case. If you just allow supply to meet demand, trust me, prices will come down. Supply and demand is 100% undefeated. And by the way, there's actually a great example of these principles coming into effect in a blue city that is run currently by a Democratic governor, and that of course is the city of Minneapolis, which actually completely trimmed back their zoning regulation codes, and guess what? Prices of housing fell in that particular city. Now, unfortunately, they slowed the growth, or the growth in the rate of decrease of housing in that area, by introducing some rent control. But overall, cleaning up your zoning code is the number one thing that you can do in order to fix this problem. And by the way, before you guys say that the reason Minneapolis saw reductions or a slowing of their rent or their cost of housing is because of George Floyd's death and the Black Lives Matter riots, I just want to point out that it is in fact due to reforms that well predate but do overlap in part with the George Floyd Black Lives Matter riots. You see, from 2017 all the way to 2022, they dramatically increased the number of apartments that they were building in the city of Minneapolis, and this of course led to a rent increase over that 5-year period of time of just 1%. By contrast, when you compare their numbers to the state numbers and to other cities in the Midwest, it turns out they outperformed the state in every metric. They built more housing units, again 12% increase compared to the state's 4% increase. Their rent rose slower, a 1% increase compared to a 14% increase statewide, and a 12% decrease in homelessness compared to a 14% increase in homelessness statewide. It's the zoning restrictions, everyone. Getting rid of them solves the problem. It makes places more affordable. It's that simple. Now, there's actually a great book on this subject that I highly recommend that people read. It is called Arbitrary Lines, and it goes over the history of zoning, the intent behind zoning, and the fact that the whole purpose of zoning is to actually limit supply of housing to prevent people from building, and this is the major problem that we're experiencing in this country. And by the way, while I'm praising a lot of red states with red state governors for cleaning up their zoning codes, it's also important for you to understand that this is not necessarily all the time a partisan issue, as highlighted by the Minneapolis example, but of course by the current presidential election, because President Trump and all these different Republicans decided that they were going to say that they're going to protect all these different zoning laws, when the fact of the matter is that is definitely a problem. Now, luckily for us, the federal government doesn't have all that much influence on these zoning codes in the United States of America. Now, of course, they can incentivize zoning codes codes, which is something that was done post FDR or during the FDR administration, which is absolutely disastrous. But they could also remain neutral and allow cities and local municipalities and states to clean it up themselves. But this has to be something that people actively work towards. But the fact of the matter is, NIMBYism is in fact real, and people end up fighting constantly in order to reduce the chances of zoning reform, because the current homeowners benefit from this. And if you're in a place like Los Angeles, if you're in a place like San Francisco or New York City, and you own and your home values are inflated by hundreds of thousands of dollars due to decades upon decades of zoning and restrictions and all of that, the fact is the chances of you being moved off of that position are extraordinarily rare, even though we know that that is what needs to happen for people to benefit. Because yes, while the drop in housing definitely is going to cost people who bought at the peak in the Sun Belt during the population surge, the fact of the matter is the drop is not all that significant. And over time, guess what? The price of those homes will go up slowly, not as extremely as in these major cities. So trust me, even the homeowners benefit from this rethinking zoning as well. But you know what? These are just all my thoughts related to this. Again, I will link that interactive map in the description of this video for you guys to check out. But I want to know what you guys think down in the comments below. As usual, if you like this video, show me by leaving a like, subscribe for more content, follow me on my social media, support me via the support links in the description of this video. This has been me talking about the real drivers of housing increases and how people sometimes, even if they get most of it, don't get it. Till next time.